Well, my name is Carol Howe, and I'm so glad to be with you today. There's nothing in the world more fun than sharing this information that we've acquired over the years, sometimes at great cost, and we sure would like to save you some hassle in the process.
Hi everyone, and my name is Evette Rose, and I'm so excited to be back here with Carol Howe again, where we're going to be talking about addictions and also our experiences with that.
And what we love is we come from very opposite positions. So Evette is going to kind of tell you her story, so to speak. I'll tell you a little bit about how this became an interest of mine. And then we'll look jointly at what it is that drives us to our addictions in the first place, what to do about it, and so on.
Perfect. So how my journey started is that right now my life is fantastic. It is exactly how I want it to be. However, it hasn't always been that way. Now, in the past, almost 12 years ago, I was a full-blown alcoholic at the age of 21, and I was smoking 30 cigarettes a day. I was in and out of destructive and abusive relationships, and I was also with work-related problems. To say that I was overworked is an understatement. There was a point where I spent a lot of time in hospital for exhaustion and getting, vitamin B and vitamin shots just so that I can wake up in the morning. And there was one day where I was just eating a biscuit and I was chewing it. And then 1 minute I felt something really hard. And I'm like, well, this is a chocolate biscuit. What is so hard in this thing? And I pulled it out, and it was the half of one of my back teeth that came out, and I didn't even feel it. And that is how malnourished I was from all the drinking and the smoking, the bad dieting, the excessive exercising, even because my body constantly needed to use energy from somewhere. So I was literally depleting my body from all its inner resources, emotionally, psychologically, and also physically. And so, and it was the alcoholism was so bad that I would start in the morning with a shot of vodka, and then and lunchtime there was a pub across from the street. Thank God at the time for me to cope with the stress, because I don't know, it probably would have been drugs if it wasn't alcohol. And however, I did have a very strong predisposition for alcohol, and that was a much more attractive option for me, which Carol and I will explain from both our experiences. The differences and why some people are addicted to some substances or behaviors and some are not. Mm-hmm. So alcohol was a very attractive option for me, including smoking. And so all this drinking and the smoking just took its toll. And I had no awareness, first of all, of how destructive my lifestyle was, because the alcoholism and the smoking, the abusive relationships, the excessive working became a lifestyle. To me, it was normal. I didn't see anything wrong with that. And also, it was a pattern that I saw in my dad. It's a pattern that I saw in the family line. So for me, it was just, that's the way of life. This is how we live life.
Well, see, that's fascinating, because all of us go through this incarceration process when we're very little, and it never occurs to us to question, like, is there another way to do life? It's like, this is life as far as we know, and everybody in all cultures goes through this same process. So my background was very different, both so far as parents were concerned, and my husband, only husband ever, in our early days, he would drink his martinis at night, but he was not a drunk by any sort of a description of that. And that kind of didn't bother me until our boys were born about 7 years later. And then I made up a story to myself that, well, once you're a father, this shouldn't be happening. It's amazing how arbitrary we are about what is and what isn't okay. But nevertheless, during the years, I felt like, although he was a very polite drinker, he was not one of those fall down drunk and live under a bridge kind of drinkers. He conducted his business and behaved himself. And, so as people who are alcoholics go, he was at the very nice end. But that didn't stop me from finding the whole thing very upsetting. And I'll tell you, one of the, I've had a lot of worst days in my life throughout my long life, but one of them was having to recognize I was an enabler. Right. I was the typical, wanting to be polite and wanting to be nice and all of that, and kind of secretly, I don't mean I was enabler by buying his alcohol. I was enabler by not speaking up for what was going on with me, taking care of myself and that sort of thing. So I would not have thought many years ago that I would even be talking about this topic, you know, but about 20 years ago, I was invited to participate in one of 4 speakers in a Women in Recovery workshop that a man who lives up in Georgia used to sponsor for people in the recovering community. He was very generous in that regard. The other 3 presenters were all from the AA tradition, and I come out of, let's say, the more spiritual non-duality Course in Miracles position, and I had been at that for a very long time by this time. So the 4 of us presented our material, and at the end of, I guess, Saturday, after the day long of the Friday night and Saturday, people came around and wanted to ask me more and more questions. Well, what that devolved into was after dinner, and this was held on the campus of a small university in Georgia. So it was like the typical great big living room and sit in front of the fireplace. Well, this great big large group of women were so interested in this, you might say, new idea and new approach about their addictions. We sat there until 2 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, well, if this is really new information for people who have been in that community for a long time, maybe I better pay more attention to this. So I came back home, I don't know, maybe a year later or so. I thought, well, I think I'll do this same workshop, just a day-long thing for my community here in Central Florida. And it had been entitled Healing the Hurt Behind Addictions, because I could very much see that what was driving people to their addictions was their hurt. And so out of that came a book. I hadn't planned to do any of this. It was one of those ways that we're led in our lives. I probably would not have done that workshop here, nor would the book that I wrote that grew out of that ever occurred, except that these women were spellbound by new information about the whole topic of addictions.
Right.
So it's like, well, okay, I guess addictions is one of my assorted topics from then on. And it fits beautifully with what you indicated. A lifestyle for you in the beginning was be so distracted, you had no way of ever saying, does this life make sense? You know, is there a better way to live? It's like not until you were kind of thrown to the ground, so to speak, defeated, did you come to there must be a better way to live than this.
Yeah.
So in any event, we kind of come forward to, let's say, as recently as yesterday afternoon, when I was speaking with a young woman who had just been through quite a trauma in her life. She was from out of the AA tradition and had been sober for about 10 years. She's the daughter of somebody I know. I know the parents, although I don't know her well. I've just met her once or twice over the years. They don't live in Florida. And she told me about her dilemma. And she was so typical of all of us and what drives all of us to our addictions, which is why I want to tell you this story. So I was asking her how she was feeling and so on. And I said, she, like so many, was trying already after this very difficult situation to make plans for what to do about it, what she was going to tell her husband, and so on and so forth. She was trying to take action. She was trying to think. I said, you can't either plan or think while you are in such emotional turmoil. So the first thing we have to do is calm these emotions. And here was the instructive part that I want everybody to really pay attention to. I said, what you want to do to help turn off the stress response, which is responsible for our emotional state, is reach out with a kind of attitude of kindness, just toward the way you feel. And you know what she said? She said, somehow, I said, you just need to be kind to yourself. and the experience you're having right now. This is your experience now. Embrace it, and with kindness. And she said, I don't think I deserve to be kind to myself. And it's like, to me, she might as well have handed me a 500-page volume. I can extrapolate from that exactly what's gone wrong in her life. And so a little bit later, I gave her a second example. I said, the reason why you need not to try to act or plan or drive your car or do anything else right now is because when you're in a terribly upset state and you're not allowing yourself to feel that upset, the front part of your brain turns off. So you can't even add 2 + 3 = 5. It's not that you have become unintelligent. It's that your intelligence, your intellectual ability to plan, organize, be an adult has temporarily turned off. It's just not available to you under those circumstances. So the second part of what was illustrative about this was I said kind of an emergency thing, and I gave this example that if you cut yourself badly, cooking, for instance, you wouldn't say, I wonder what's the matter with the knives in my kitchen. How long ago did I sharpen my knives? You would take yourself to the emergency room and get yourself sewed up so you're not bleeding all over your floor. Then you can ask those more long-range questions. Do I need to cut differently? Do I need different knives? And you know what her response was? She said, I probably wouldn't have gone to the emergency room. I probably would have thought, I'm responsible for cooking dinner for all of these people. I'm going to just somehow have to make it through. And it was like the degree of self-condemnation, the degree of not owning herself as a beautiful, deserving fellow human being was just extreme. See how those two simple statements tell you so much.
Right.
Did you discover that about yourself as you kind of were able to let go of the addictions themselves? And then what did you discover? I don't know, did you do it overnight, or did you just quit everything at once? And if you did, what was left?
For me, it was a little bit of a struggle. And I realized that at the time I didn't have the awareness of it, but as I became aware of my health deteriorating, which was my first level of awareness telling me something's wrong, we need to fix this. Mm-hmm. And the more I started to fix this, and that's also when I started getting into personal development, and when my level of awareness started climbing up as we climb that ladder, as we learn and we learn more about ourselves. And what I ultimately came down to the conclusion finally is that I had a very destructive relationship with my father. And he was also a very heavy drinker and alcoholic. And he was also a smoker, very heavy smoker. Mm-hmm. And I hardly saw him. Even though we lived in the same house, there were times, there were days where I wouldn't see him because he would go straight to the pub and come back home 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. So we would always miss each other. Mm-hmm. And when I went to school, he would be fast asleep. And so what happened was those little bits of moments of times when I did see my dad, when I did connect with him, even though he was drunk, there was alcohol and there was always cigarette smoke everywhere in the house. So here I realized that I made an unconscious association that when I miss my dad, when I want to connect to my masculinity, when I want to be around my dad, I associated that need with alcohol and with cigarettes. And so as I matured, as my stress levels climbed, and also when I was working so hard as a female, we tap too much into our masculinity, too much into the testosterone aspect of ourselves, and we become less feminine and we feel that imbalance. So what happens is because and normally that happens if we don't have a healthy masculine figure in our life, which I never had. Yeah. So what I did was I would actually reach out to alcohol and to cigarettes because I needed to rebalance that masculine and feminine aspect within myself. And what happened is that I also realized that every time when I really miss my dad, you know how we all have these moments where we just sit there and we ponder back into the past and we think, gosh, I wish things could have been different. Yeah. I wish my dad could have been there in the way that I needed him to be. Yes. And every time when I had that longing feeling, that is when I craved cigarettes and alcohol even more. And also what I noticed that was in my relationships with partners, with intimate partners, I noticed that the moment that the relationship starts to take a decline, and I can see that it's not gonna, there's no recovery, I would dive back into the cigarettes. I will dive back into the alcohol. So it's just so interesting, my observation with that. And within that, I found so much power, because the more knowledge I had of the situation and the addiction, the easier it was for me to really start to learn what to heal, what to let go of, what to focus on, and how to refocus my entire perspective.
Well, that is just fabulous. And you see, what you noted is that as you started to feel distress, you specifically said loneliness, but let's just call it distress, because distress comes in assorted flavors, and whatever they are, they're distressing to us. And we have habituated ourselves to deciding that distress is not okay.
Right.
It means there's something the matter with us. It means all sorts of things to different people, but the net of it is, and I see this in every culture that I have had anything to do with, all socioeconomic groups, all religious groups, all political groups, all age groups, all educational background groups, it's all the same. It's like we've got this bias, fear of feeling our actual experience in the moment. So you know what we do? We spend our lives doing terror management. We're terrified of our feelings, like this young woman yesterday who would say, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do about these feelings. I said, nothing. You're not supposed to. And she said, I don't know how I'm supposed to understand these. You're not supposed to understand. This is not about, it was not about understanding. It's about feeling how you feel. And it's as if I have just reverted to speaking Russian. It's like, how do you do that? You don't do that. You finally just stay in the present moment without thinking. You know what? People don't realize thinking is one of our most major addictions. And you think, thinking, it's like, what's the matter with thinking? Nothing's the matter with thinking when it's appropriate to be thinking. It's thinking to avoid being present. And you notice how much of the time, no matter what's going on, people, and including us, of course, will revert to thinking about things in the past or anticipating things in the future. But we have to actually practice staying present. And the reason why we don't is about the first thing we run into if we stay present is all of this unexpressed and unfelt and undealt with fear and sorrow and loneliness. So people might approach that and go, I'm not going there. You'd be crazy to go there. Well, all the stories that have come down as fables through cultures forever that might have the dragon sitting at the gate to the treasure house or something like that. It's like that metaphor doesn't come down through a lot of cultures out of nowhere.
Right.
That's really telling us a great deal, because if we could get that the pain that we're so afraid of is the raw material of our joy, then we could approach this in a very different manner.
I love what you said there, and to almost like tag on to what you just said there, that if you also were, in my case, is because I love what you just said there. In my case, my environment was extremely destructive. Again, the challenges that I had with my dad, and he made no secret of it that he didn't want me, that he didn't like me, that he wished I wasn't born. So it was a very, it was a very love-hate type of relationship with him. And I realized that the toxicity, the emotional toxicity that was in my environment, and also the stress and the destructiveness actually became an internal process for me, because I started treating myself the way that I was treated by him. It was that self-hatred, that self-loathing, that self-rejection, that abandoning myself and feeling that I'm not worthy, I shouldn't be here, I'm not worthy of being here. So it all became his voice became my voice. And then I reverted to coping mechanisms that I watched him use to cope with his life, to cope with my inner dialogue and my inner process.
Yes. I can identify with that, and I'm sure so many people can, because of course I am an older generation than you, and my father didn't want any kids. It's not that he particularly disliked us, but he came into, my mother was his second wife, and he came into it in debt because he had been married to a very high-powered socialite in a large city in the United States, and it was about to be the beginning of the Second World War. And the last thing in the war, and he had one daughter by his first marriage who was about old enough to be my mother. There was a big age discrepancy between him and my mother. And it was very clear that it's like the last thing in the world that he wanted under these circumstances was more kids, which I, as an adult, can absolutely identify with. I wouldn't want him to do that either. So, but I guess he was coerced into one child. And my younger brother was really a legitimate accident. My mother is not the kind of person who would have been underhanded about that. So in any event, so I grew up with that kind of, not because he was a very polite gentleman, he was completely emotionally unavailable. So this made your father unavailable. Mine was too, for very different reasons, but the net result is the same. You know, so I want people to realize that you can be in what looks like an overtly very difficult situation, or you can be in one that most people will go, gee, well, it looks like your life is really pretty great. And I did have a lot of great things in my life, but that underlying what we learned, because then what we learn, like you say, is that the world isn't here for us. Right. In other words, it's not that it's particularly personal to us as little people. We wouldn't use language like, I guess I don't deserve to be wanted. You know, it's like the deserving part is not part of our ability to reflect upon in those very, very baby early years. But we just grow up with the notion that I'm not, the world doesn't want me. It's not even especially the parents. It's like, I'm not wanted by the world. And because this happens so early, we don't question it. We just presume this is true. And now, how am I going to cope with this circumstance? It doesn't occur to us, even as young adults, to say, is everything I believe true about myself and the world? We just presume it is, and we have our coping strategies built in. So what did you consider once you got past, say, drugs, alcohol, overworking, and so on, and as you became more sophisticated about this, did your coping mechanisms, probably you still had some in place, what were those before you were able to really start to clear out all the pain?
So for me, the alcohol and the cigarette started slowing down until I was able to completely let go of it. And I mean, I would still have a glass of wine with dinner if I'm out with people. But the good part about that now is that I'm in control of the wine, and the wine is not in control of me.
Absolutely.
So I'm in the driver's seat now, and that's a really empowering, good feeling, because the pain that drove me to want that and need that is not there. So when I want that now, I actually associate it with socializing. So for me now, it's actually a fun thing and not a destructive cycle.
Absolutely.
So what I noticed what happened was that I still have a big love affair with my work. And for me, it's my passion because it actually brings me joy. And to be honest, it's a healthy one that I don't quite want to change quite yet, because I feel comfortable in that. It's not where it's destructive for me. And I wouldn't call it another addiction, but it is something that I love to do a lot. So it is probably an addiction.
No,
but it's a healthy one.
You've made a very key point, which is anything we do can be an addiction or it can be healthy depending upon what's driving us to do it. Like right. Golf is a perfectly fine sport, but if you play golf all the time because you can't stand to go home because you're afraid of the feelings going to come up, well then it's going to put golf for you in that category.
But other aspects of your life are going to suffer, and that's when it becomes a destructive, addictive behavior.
That's what I mean. In other words, in that case, playing golf is an addiction because it's an avoidance mechanism. See, the issue is not the actual element like alcohol or the behavior itself. It's what am I using it for?
Right.
In other words, what goal is it serving? And that's why the answer, and when I wrote this book, which I didn't even know I was going to write, that was called Healing the Hurt Behind Addictions, but I guess it turned out to be on my plate to write it, is that someone who had bought the tapes, because of course I always recorded my workshops, and this was back in the days of cassette tapes. Somebody had bought the tapes and didn't type very well and was using her 2 fingers to say, she wrote and she said, I typed this entire workshop because I love it so much and I want to be able to just pull up any page I want and read it, and you should turn this into a book, which it had never occurred to me to do. But once I read through her notes, because I don't know at the beginning of a workshop what's going to happen. I know what the topic is basically, but then it's free form after that. I don't know what's going to happen. And I read it and I thought, wow, there's more good material in here than I remembered. So I decided to clean it up. You know how you have to change the spoken word to the written word. And as I was about finished, I was doing a counseling session with a man who recognized finally his addiction to sex. And at the end of that, I thought, well, I know what I need to do for a phase 2 of this is interview a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of different kind of addictions so that I could ask them questions. I interviewed all of them. I don't know why I have to write books where I interview everybody. I need to stop that. It takes forever to do. So I interviewed them all, transcribed everything, and then used their responses as the second phase of the book. And the purpose of that is to show that no matter what kind of an addiction, no matter what your background, no matter all of those other outer form, where you live, the level of your education, your age, whatever it is, everybody had the same response when I asked them, like, what did an addict mean to you? And they all had very kind of derisive things. I thought that was somebody who lived under the bridge and was homeless and things like that. So the answers fascinated me in being so the same. And I thought, if this survey of people have exactly the same notions, exactly the same fear, and this is the key part, the same fear of, first of all, kind of their horror at having to acknowledge that they were addicted to the particular substance or behavior, and then their fear of the fear that once they stopped the behavior they had to deal with. This is the key problem. If when we started to experience our distress, we would go, oh, okay, well, clearly I have been unloving. I have been, believe some things that aren't true. I've turned on my stress response. Here's the result. Wow. Now I will process. It is at this juncture that we all make the wrong choice and drive ourselves crazy. And every one of them recognized their fear. They also recounted their willingness to do it anyway, and the great relief that they received as a result of this, realizing that, like the young woman I referred to a few minutes ago, they all believed things about themselves that were too small. They were unloving. They were incorrect. They were laboring, as we all do, under these notions about ourselves, and then ultimately others as well, since we project it onto others. But it's the common single denominator that every single human being on the planet, who ever was or ever will be, needs to address. And you think, if there's one common problem to everyone, and basically nobody seems to know what it is. This is the thing that's just, it's kind of like once your eyes are open to something and you think, how can we not know this? And yet we're all asleep. This doesn't mean we're wrong or evil or stupid or anything else. It does mean we believe those things about ourselves often. But the thing that is kind of heartbreaking is the answer to what troubles us is so simple. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be well educated. You don't have to be wealthy. You don't have to do anything. You just have to be a little brave. You have to have a little courage to go, what if I would be willing to experience my actual real experience in this moment? You know, if everybody on the planet did that this minute, all of our difficulties of every kind would cease, because we would stop our conflicts, we would stop our wars, we would stop everything that's destructive, because we would realize that once we stop being self-destructive by believing these things we believe, our natural love for one another, for ourselves, for our part in the greater plan, could become known to us. And then we would act out of that greater love for ourselves and one another, instead of, if we're busy condemning ourselves, we're then going to see the reason to do that everywhere else, and we're down that slippery slope.
And I just want to backtrack just 5 seconds, because what you said was so valuable. And because when you were talking about the willingness and the awareness, those two factors needs to come together when you want to tackle addictions, especially from my personal experience, because first of all, I had the lack of awareness and my body brought it to my awareness. And then what happened was the willingness to change it wasn't quite there until that one day where I was ready to commit suicide. And that is where I decided, I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to try and change this, because I'm not ready to go. Even though the desire to leave was so strong. And I called the office and I said, I'm not coming in today. I need this day for me.
I have something else going on today. I'm going to go jump off the bridge.
Right? Yeah. It's like, I'm like, you know, I think the train tracks is really good right now. And that's when I went to the computer. And back then we still had these big clunky computers. And I sat there with my cigarette in my mouth, and the ash was like really long because I was sitting so still trying to figure out what am I going to do. And I just realized there's people around me that's happy. So there has to be a solution to this, because if they can feel that, then it means that I can experience that. But what sets me apart from them? And that's when I went to Google with my shot of vodka in, and I'm sitting there. This was me.
My cigarette, my glass, and Google. The great.
Right? I was still in recovery mode. I kind of weaned off of it. I didn't go cold turkey. And I sat there and I typed in how to be happy. I Googled that. And that is how my journey started.
You see, you're so correct that willingness, and for most people, now there are a few people, like I didn't feel like I was driven, and this way we come from opposite directions too, which is very good, so that we can address a broader spectrum of people, is that I didn't feel driven to my quest through desperation. I felt driven to my quest because I thought something's not right here, something is missing here, and I'm going to find out what it is. Most people are driven to their quest through desperation of some kind. Virtually, they have pushed their addictions, they have pushed their self-hatred, you might say, to the limit. Yes. And they're down on their knees. They have reached whatever their bottom is. And then there are a few people who just are born into this life to find answers. You know, they don't have to be quite driven, but I've dealt with so many people. You know, a child dies, you know, a tragedy of just any kind dies. And for some people, the worst tragedy in their lives is when their dog has to be put to sleep. I remember that was one of the worst days of my life ever, was my beautiful big German Shepherd having to be put to sleep. I just thought I would never recover from that. And so it's like the size of the event and the emotional experience that derives from it are not necessarily equal. In other words, something that pushes somebody to the edge of, I've got to find answers, would not be what pushes someone else to the edge. But whatever it is, when we're driven, like you say, then we're asked only to have a little bit of willingness. So thank you for saying that, because if you thought to be fully 100% willing to feel how I feel, no, I just am not 100% willing. It's like, thankfully, you only have to be a little bit willing. You just have to realize, living my life, believing what I believe, and kind of following the directives that I'm obviously following and don't realize I'm doing it, aren't serving me. There must be a better way to live. And if I could just find a little bit about a better way to live, I'm a little bit willing to do that. And I'll tell you, once we're willing, and I know this sounds sort of dramatic, but it's kind of like help from all the dimensions comes rushing in. In other words, you've opened up a little space there, because in your own way, you've said, help. And when we really feel that experience of help, it's there. And it can be there in unseen ways, which for some people is a little too spooky and weird, or it can be there in that you go on Google and you find just what you're looking for, or you read a book, or somebody suddenly makes a statement that had never registered with you before. But if we could realize that even in the smallest ways, help is waiting for us to ask for it. And to realize living my life with my ego mind in charge is always going to fail.
Absolutely. And going to that, also accepting that support is what's important, because what I saw with my dad was he went to rehab 6 times. I remember as a kid, we would drive there and I would look at my mom, we would drop him off and we would drive back, and I'm looking at my mom like, Mom, do you think this is it? Do you think it's going to get better? And my mom would never answer me. She was still supporting him, like, okay, if you want to get better, let's go. And then he would come out, and then the psychologist would either come out talking about how my dad had a, love affair with a woman that was addicted to pain tablets, or it was this and it was that. It was just having another addictive pattern in an addictive rehab. It was just surreal, because what I realized also was that he wasn't willing to accept the support. He didn't trust the support. He didn't want to break the cycle because he wasn't ready to. He didn't make that conscious decision. He wasn't driven hard enough, onto his knees, basically, to let go. And he passed away this year as a result of the abuse in his body. His body just said, okay, well, if you're not going to check out, then I am.
I'm out of here.
His body just couldn't cope anymore. I don't know how he managed to live that long. I would sometimes tell my mom, I think that pickled his body organs, because of alcohol. That's how he's still alive, because I don't know how he made it this long. I really don't. And and the thing for him is, I think for him, and I'm sharing this because I think I'm hoping that some people would be able to relate to this, is that a lot of guilt was driving him, and his fear of facing God because of his religion, his fear of facing, what he was really truly running from and hiding from, which was his own inner turmoil. But it's also circumstances and events that actually happened to him that he didn't want to look at. Because if he did, he would make it real, and he will bring that, the acts and the actions and the consequences of that, into his reality. So what we do is we put up this glazed wall between us and our past and our reality, and going, well, I think that's kind of an event that happened, but we don't really want to look at that. So we're gonna drink. So, and what happens is that, with addictions, whether it's an addiction to relationships, tobacco, alcohol, drugs, it doesn't have a long lasting effect, right? The emotional reward,
you gotta have more and more and more.
This causes the person to reach out to the substance once again with intention to reset the nervous system, right? That is ultimately only searching for that comfort, reassurance, and safety and emotional bonding. So it's, and with my dad, in his specific case, he didn't trust that bonding. He didn't trust even feeling safe. Feeling safe felt unsafe for him. Yeah. So it was easier to be in a state of chaos, to be in a state of trauma and drama, which he was really good at, instead of actually feeling safe. He actually had a negative association with being peaceful. and with happiness and with joy.
Oh, a lot of people do. Oh,
Because his sense of peace and joy was constantly disrupted, he didn't have a positive association with it. So he unconsciously sabotaged every effort or event that came into his life that could have opened up those doors for him.
we
And I
do.
followed the same path.
We do that, and you just made the key association in your recital of this experience that he was having and that you were having peripherally with him. Is this sounds strange to a lot of people, but the key element we are addicted to is guilt. You go, what? I thought I was addicted to, like you say, relationships, sports, technology, food, sex, whatever it might be. And it's like, that's, you might say, the surface level of the addiction, but underneath it, that drives all of it is our guilt. And it's our guilt that we have not wanted to give up. And you know why? It's helpful to know why, if we're going to make a statement as preposterous as we're addicted to guilt, because guilt and the conflict that brings about is food for the ego. Right. In other words, that sense of personal self, which is something we've made up. It's really a collection of all of our beliefs and conditioning, and this is how life is, and so on and so forth. And the body is associated with it. But notice how unwilling people are to let go of their guilt. It's like that's the most down in the basement root foundation of all other addictions is our addiction to guilt. If we gave up our addiction to guilt, we would give up our specialness, our who's better, who's worse. I can't be a winner if we can't have losers, and so on and so forth. And because it's that constant judgment and comparison and so on that keeps our sense of separate self alive. Since it's an artificial construct, it constantly needs fuel, so to speak, and our conflict and judgment and grievances fuel that. Well, that's also what makes us terrified and afraid. So it's like, what an awful thing to have with one part of your mind you think, I need this guilt, although this is not usually a conscious mind thought. This is just, it operates under the surface. And, over here, I feel like I must have it. And on the other hand, you can never be at peace or happy or safe or anything else as long as it's there. What a bind to be in. One part of your mind thinks, I can never let guilt go. And the other part of your mind knows you must let it go. What an awful situation, because that then brings us to, you can't straddle the fence. You can't do like a Chinese menu where I'll say, I'll have some out of column A and some out of column B. It's all or nothing. You either have got to come down on the side of, I am now going to allow myself to be healed with whatever steps are required for that, or not. And so if our answer is going to be, no, I'm not, then one will have to recognize that you will pay a really big price for that. You will never be able to do an end run around this in some way. On the other hand, if we decide, I now need to let go of my guilt. Right now, in this present moment, I am loving, I'm good, I'm pure. None of my past behavior has ruined the essence or the presence of me. Every moment is a new clean slate. I don't have to make reference to anything else. You might say, I can't be loving because of all the stuff that happened to me earlier. And it's like, yes, you can. You can decide to be loving today if you recognize the great price you're paying for not being loving. You would be willing to think this out. I told a story in one of the films in our online See How Life Works series that is really a very dramatic tale, but I'll make it short. A long time ago, when I lived in Denver, about 6 couples had this little group. We met every other week, and we explored everything we could find to explore in the way of what makes life work. We had a couple of psychiatrists, and all of us were deeply interested in this subject, but it was very intellectual because we didn't know what else to do at that point. This was a long time ago. So someone said, well, there's a really interesting guy who knows how to do past life regression. So why don't we have him come and he can do whatever that's about? So it fell to me, as is usually the case, to make all the arrangements for this. So I called him up. I knew only his telephone number and his name. And this beautiful voice answers the phone. Oh, the other thing I had heard about him was that he was a truck driver. So this beautiful voice, and I thought, wow, this voice does not fit in my mind with a truck driver. It was a beautiful voice. And so he came, we enjoyed him a lot. He became kind of a friend of mine. He would periodically show up at my house, knowing I had 2 little babies and toddlers, as the years went on. And he just became a good friend. He would just kind of come and camp out there. So early in this, I said, you know what? I don't get how you can be a truck driver and you've got this gorgeous voice. And he said, because I used to be a disc jockey. It's like, well, that explains the voice. I said, well, then how did you get to be a truck driver? He's now passed away. And so, because this was private information, but he's passed away and I'm not going to tell you anything else about him. So you will never know who I'm talking about. And he said he had reached the point where he was in great despair over the love of his life leaving him. And he decided that life was so bad, and because he saw no other options, that he was going to kill himself. So he had his gun in hand, and he was at whatever location he had chosen to end his life. And the thought occurred to him, since I'm going to be gone in a second, I might as well just let go of everything that I hold against everybody. It was like one of those thoughts that just went through his mind in a very fast flash, but it was real and it was heartfelt and it was complete. And at that second, he said, for a split second, I felt like scum at the bottom of a bucket. Like I went through this momentary feeling of being horrible. And then he said, the world broke into light. And see, he had no metaphysical background, no spiritual background. This is stunning enough. If you do have that kind of a background, all of a sudden he could see the light in everything. He was simply transfixed. Clearly, he didn't shoot himself. And he realized, with no background, he wanted to start finding out about this. There's no internet at this time. So you can't go, what does this mean when I have a light-filled experience? And he had no awareness that there was even a body of literature about that. But he realized, I can't be a disc jockey anymore. I've got to find a job where I am by myself for long periods of time, where I have a chance to let whatever this experience is be assimilated. So that's how he became a long-haul truck driver. So, but he said, I could sit and literally look at a blade of grass, and the beauty and the love and the light in this grass was so stunning that I simply couldn't do anything else. And it's such a dramatic story, because all spiritual traditions will say, if you will let go of your grievances and your judgments, let your mind settle, and feeling how you feel now is part of that process. The thing we don't want to do, to feel our own emotional state now. But if we can calm the chemicals, so to speak, let the body chemistry return to normal, then we can start to explore, where am I unkind to myself or someone else? Where am I unloving? Where do I have judgments and grievances that I clearly need to let go of? They're the things that are driving my pain, that's driving my addiction. So I have to keep getting down to the very bottom of what's causing. At the surface, I have addictions. In the middle, I've got pain that I'm not allowing myself to stop the process and let go of. And what's causing that pain is my own guilt, my own grievances, my own sense of self-hatred and self-condemnation. And you have to kind of go through, for most people, you have to go through this in reverse order. You first have to realize your addictions don't serve you. They're ruining your life. They're killing you. And then to flow into that, I hate this. I don't want to be by myself. I don't want to feel what I feel. But you know what I would wish for everybody? I would wish anybody who's watching this, like, Evette's got one in her hands and I've got the other. And we're going to really be here with you. Plus all kinds of other things that we don't even know about are here with you when you've got a little bit of courage and a little bit of willingness to go, I'm going to not be afraid of my fear. I'm not going to be afraid of these feelings. And in a fraction of the time we've spent pushing them away and hating them, they can be resolved. It could be in 2 seconds. It could be in an hour. It can be a week, whatever it is. It's so short compared to the amount of time that we have lost ourselves trying to prevent this very healing to occur. And then once that emotional state is settled, then I've kind of turned my frontal lobe back on. So now I actually can think straight. And then I can do the exploration of look at what I learned. Look at what I believe about myself and others. I need my brain rewired. And so now I need to follow whatever path allows me to radically change my mind about myself and everyone else. I need to follow a path that allows me to see the value in and want to love myself and everyone else. And with that, pain cannot be in your life. You see, pain is in my life as the absence of love. Fear and the pain that comes with it is the absence of love. If I'm being more and more loving to myself and my situations and everyone else, there's not a place for pain to show up.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, 100%. And I'm sure it's echoing and making sense for everyone else and having that beautiful dominoes effect. It almost feels like that effect. I love it.
Yeah. And so please fill in around the edges of something that I have left out or understated or anything else. Please add anything that wants to be added to that.
Nothing really, just a short little statement that I love to tell my clients when they feel really stuck, and that's to tell them that there's an opposite to everything in life. Where there's pain, there's joy. Where there's day, there's night. And where there's a problem, there's a solution. And where you feel stuck, there is a place for freedom. There is solution. So that's the good news. It's just becoming aware of the solutions. It's a matter of having the willingness to allow yourself to shift perspective. And also, it's very crucially important to also to have healthy support around you when you do go through these changes, when you do make that conscious decision that I am ready to heal.
Absolutely. And there are all sorts of options for that, whether it's
Absolutely.
various 12-step groups or your own spiritual practice or your own group of people that you meet with or whatever. But if we can realize that healing the pain is so fast compared to how long we've hung on to it. And that, you see, if our pain and our fear is the absence of love, what better way to approach this than to decide I'm going to love the circumstance of feeling the way I do right now. You know, it's kind of what we've all heard for ages about face the fear and do it anyway. It's like, be aware of your pain, or of your grief, of your sorrow, of your hopelessness, whatever it might be, and decide I'm going to welcome it. I'm going to befriend it. I'm going to open my heart to this.
I love that.
No judgment. I'm just going to open my heart to it. And when you do that, it melts. An example that I'm fond of using, and then you can kind of wrap things up, is if you put an ice cube in a pan and put it on the stove and you turn up the heat, then nobody has ever met an ice cube that says, I'm not melting.
Yeah.
Ice cubes don't have a choice. When they're in a pan on the stove, the heat's turned up, and of course we all know from 8th grade science or something that the heat causes the molecules to speed up. The solid turns to a liquid and ultimately to a gas and evaporates, you know, as long as it stays heated up. And as probably all of us have done who've decided to put something on the stove, then I'm just going to go check this thing on the internet, and whatever it is on your stove burns up, you know. All that water evaporates. But the thing is that it's an automatic process.
Right.
And so if we will submit our pain or our fear to the literal transforming fire of love itself, then your fear and your pain and your loneliness and your distress doesn't have a vote. It doesn't get to stay. It's not an entity in and of itself. It's merely the absence of all of the things that we're looking for.
Love it. Beautiful. Love that, Carol. Thank you so much for sharing everything with us today. It was amazing. I loved it.
Well, thank you for everybody for being willing to even think about possibly there's another way for us to look at our addictions, and we hope you will, because you do not deserve to hurt yourself anymore.
Absolutely. And Carol, what is that book again that you wrote about addictions for people?
It's called
wonderful. Yes,
it's called Healing the Word Behind Addictions and Compulsive Behaviors.
Beautiful.
And I had a friend of, I'm going to have another cover done. I've had this just for the longest time, and I had so many other projects I haven't been able to get back to it. I was talking to a friend of mine who's an artist, and I said, you know, the whole idea is that we're all in the same boat together. Whether you think you're addicted or whether you're not, everybody is. Addictions afflict 100% of us. Right. I arrogantly used to think these were addictions, and I didn't have any of those, so I wasn't one of them. But right. Boy, nobody thinks as much as I do as one of my major addictions. But in any event, so that made every bit of sense to me. It's like we're all in the same boat together. But then over the years, I realized for all the people who don't know we're in the same boat together, it's like, what a really weird cover. So these days when I get around to it, I'll fix it. But in any event, yes, and we cover a lot of this in our See How Life Works online program, as well as this. Just go to carolhowe.com, go to the store, all the stuff is there, and you've got your beautiful work.
Yes, and I have Metaphysical Anatomy. It's gosh, there's probably about 720 pages with 679 medical conditions, where I wrote about the psychosomatic patterns behind emotions and trauma. But this book actually also includes womb trauma and generational trauma and predisposed genetical elements as well, and how emotional stress, when it's reached a certain point, can actually contribute to elements either developing or worsening. So there's a lot of research also behind emotional trauma, the science aspect, where I'm trying to bridge a little, I'm having fun actually, bridging science with spirituality. And that's all what Metaphysical Anatomy is about. And I have volume 2 as well, which is research only, including the level 1 technique that also has an online course for it.
Marvelous, marvelous. Well, I agree with you. There's not anything more fun than doing our work. So
I know, that's a good addiction.
I know that this is a choice and not an addiction.
Yes. Okay.
Well, goodbye, my dear. It's just been beautiful as always, and we'll find another one to do later.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And bye, everyone. Be the light that you are. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, dear. Bye.